Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Daily Gwei Refuel, where we recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano. It says 23rd of January 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So kicking off today, we have an update around the case that Roman is facing here with regards to Tornado Cash. Now, as you guys know, a few of the developers of Tornado Cash were arrested and charged with a bunch of offenses such as money laundering in relation to Tornado Cash. And today we have an update from Roman. He shared this tweet here on Twitter where he said, 2024 is the year that will define the rest of my life. Honestly, I'm scared, but also hopeful that this community cares with a passion. Please donate towards my legal defense. And you can donate at wewantjusticedao.org. So, I mean, if this is something that you're interested in donating to, you can go ahead and donate. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But I want to explain why I think that donating to this cause is obviously a net positive for the entire ecosystem. So when it comes to Tornado Cash and it comes to, I guess, what Roman and others have been charged with, they've been charged with things like money laundering, right? And I think that there's been a lot of discussions around, what constitutes money laundering in the context of on-chain mixers. Are they actually guilty of it, considering that they weren't in control of the protocol itself? There were arguments made that they had some control over it because there was a token and there was a DAO and the team owned a lot of the token. So all of this stuff is going to get hashed out in court. And the reason why I think it's worth donating to this cause, and obviously don't feel obligated to donate. I'm not saying that, you should or shouldn't. I'm just saying that, giving my opinion on why I think it's a noble cause to donate to is because Roman is not just fighting for himself here. He's fighting to set precedent around a bunch of different things within crypto, or at least set positive precedent about a bunch of different things within crypto that affect all of us. I mean, the right to privacy is something that is always under attack, always, from every government around the world, basically, even the ones that we consider to be free governments, right? Even the ones that we consider to be like the Western nations that we say, we live in a free country. I mean, if you don't have privacy, especially financial privacy at all, then I wouldn't consider you to be able to be living in a free country. I wouldn't consider you to be a free person if you weren't able to have financial privacy here. And not just financial privacy, but just encryption generally, privacy of your communications via messages. Governments around the world have been trying to outlaw this stuff for decades, right? They've been trying to fight against it for decades. But luckily for us, and not so luckily for them, it's extremely hard for them to outlaw it because it's all based on math, right? They have to try and outlaw math. And it's funny. There was something that I believe a former prime minister in Australia said a while ago, where they said, the laws of math don't apply or something, the laws of Australia apply. It was something silly, right? And it just shows like how out of touch a lot of these politicians are with technology, and especially when it comes to things like math that powers the technology, right? Like at the end of the day, encryption powers all of this stuff, which is basically just math. Right? If you break it down to its core primitives there, and that's exactly what is being fought for here. And now, of course, I think that Roman and the others that were arrested should get a very fair trial, and if the charges actually, if the charges actually are something they did and they knowingly did, and they knowingly, did whatever they're being charged with, then regardless of who thinks they're guilty and who doesn't, they should get a fair trial to determine that. I believe strongly that everyone should be entitled to a fair trial, but unfortunately, most people don't get it because it's expensive, right? A fair trial is extremely expensive, especially when it's the government prosecuting you for something like this. Like, it becomes a very, very expensive endeavor. So that's exactly why Roman here is asking for donations at wewantjusticedao.org, which you can check out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot more information on the page here for you to check out. And I definitely have verified this myself, and it is not a scam or anything like that. It is not someone trying to just kind of drain money from you and fish you, whatever. This is a legitimate site. It's a legitimate donation, place to donate. And you can see already in the comments, a bunch of people kind of donated. Brian Sean Adams from Bankless says that Bankless donated $10,000 here. There is, I guess, like KYC when you're donating. Obviously flies in the face of what I was saying about privacy, but that's an unfortunate consequence. Like, KYC is just a plague on, I guess, like the traditional financial system, and it is something that every kind of, money transmitter, as they're called, needs to do, KYC AML. Whether it actually helps at anything or not doesn't matter, whether it's just security theater or not. If you believe it's security theater like I do, then yeah, I mean, that's what it is there. But you can go check that out for yourself. If you're not comfortable with kind of doxing yourself, I believe that there are other ways to donate. I don't have them handy right now. Maybe there is something in a means thread here where you can donate basically by buying limited edition NFTs. There is something in a means tweet here which I actually didn't share today, so I'll share that in the YouTube description as well. He linked it in the replies here. There are other ways to donate if you did not want to dox yourself or kind of like give up your privacy here in order to donate to this cause. So you don't have to donate just through the WeWantJusticeDAO.org. There are other ways, and I'm sure if you maybe reached out to Amin, if you were considering a donation and you didn't want to kind of dox yourself, he would probably have other ways to do it as well. I mean, he's a very trusted and respected member of the Ethereum community, and he has been, one of the most outspoken people when it comes to this stuff. He's definitely a true Chad, as we call them, when it comes to this stuff. So yeah, you can go check all of that out. But as I said, this is something that I believe people should support. As I said, like, it's totally up to you. There's no, it's not, you're not being forced to support. And at the end of the day, it's up to you how much you want to donate. And honestly, even if you don't donate money, you can just help spread the word. Like, that's honestly, I think that's a big deal. If you have like a community that you want to share this with, if you just want to RT it on Twitter, go ahead and do that. Just keep sharing it. Keep this top of mind for people, because this, as I said, is very serious, not just for Rahman, but for obviously the future of a lot of the things that we enjoy in crypto, such as self-custody, financial privacy, privacy of communications as well, because there are a bunch of crypto protocols working on that, identity, all these sorts of stuff, right? This is definitely critical for the future of all of that. Anyway, you can go check these out. I'll link them in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so we have an update with the SEC versus Binance. Now, I covered a tweet from Meta Lawman last week, or a few days ago maybe, on the SEC versus Coinbase update. And it's interesting, the Binance one is a bit different because the judge is focusing on, not the judge, sorry, the case is also focused on BUSD and BNB. So as you guys know, BUSD was shut down by the SEC, the Binance stablecoin, and BNB has long been thought to be a security or an investment contract, whatever you want to call it here. So that's a topic here. But what stuck out to me in this, and I'll link this tweet in the YouTube description below for you to check out, is that this SEC is saying something completely opposite in Binance's case in court against Binance than they were against Coinbase when it came to securities and what tokens, apply, or what things apply to securities. And you can see Austin Campbell here replied and said, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the BUSD argument basically apply to all gift card and reward programs? Which I guess like is the point of what the SEC is trying to get across here, is that everything's a security, everything's an investment contract. So there's a lot of kind of, I guess, double speak here. There's a lot of hypocrisy. There's a lot of just contradictions here, and there are a lot of great replies in the comments and a really great overview from Meta Lawman here, which I'll link in the YouTube description below for you to check out. But yeah, it just seems like the SEC is grasping at straws here. It seems like their lawyers aren't really arguing in good faith, aren't really arguing to the letter of the law. And honestly, like, as I said, I think the chances of them winning the Coinbase case are quite high. With Binance, it's a little bit trickier, only because Binance has already been charged and settled with the Department of Justice. So that makes, I guess, like, their case a bit harder to defend, even though it is the same case, very similar case, not the same case, but a very similar case to Coinbase. They still have things like BUSD and BNB, right? So it is kind of a difference here. But as I said, like, I still believe that Coinbase has a really good chance of winning. When it comes to Binance, they may like win in that they settle some way, because honestly, it's probably worth their time to do that rather than fight it out in court, because they've already had to deal with the Department of Justice, but we're going to have to see how that all shakes out there. But anyway, you can go check out Meta Lawman's tweet. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so I guess as you guys have seen over the last 24 hours, especially, client diversity has been the hottest topic on crypto Twitter, really. I mean, on Ethereum Twitter, it's been everywhere. And I think that what really kicked it off was that DC Investor put out a tweet where he basically tweeted at Coinbase saying, hey, I'm removing all of my, ETH that I had staked with you because you guys are running basically 100% Geth, as we assume they are. And this is bad for the network because it's bad for client diversity. And of course, off of that, there was a bunch of people talking about it. Brian Armstrong actually replied to DC Investor and said that they're looking into it. And then a bunch of Coinbase protocol specialists also said this, and then eventually we got an update thread from Coinbase Cloud themselves, where they said that they obviously believe execution layer client diversity on Ethereum is a critical concern, and they said they're going to have more of a, I guess, like update by the end of February this year. So probably, I guess, like a month from now or so, they're going to have more of an update there and more of a roadmap. But they are planning on moving off Geth as soon as they can here, and the fact that Brian knows about it means that there's probably some pressure being put on as well, which is great to see. So really, I mean, we did our job, I think. I went on that long rant yesterday about how I believe that Coinbase needs to obviously get off Geth, but not just them, Lido as well. And there were some discussions around Lido and how Lido is planning to, obviously reduce their reliance on Geth over time, which is great to see. But Coinbase did bring up some interesting points and some relevant points in this thread here, where they basically said that up until recently, and maybe recently is the last 6 to 12 months, other execution layer clients probably weren't up to spec for someone like Coinbase to run, because they were further behind than Geth. And I do sympathize with that argument. I actually have a blog post from July 2020 that I wrote on the Daily Gwei Substack. So this is 3.5 years ago now, where I wrote about client diversity. And that's a very long time ago. This was pre-Beacon Chain even being live. The Beacon Chain went live December 1st, 2020, obviously pre-merge, a very long time ago. And I was talking in that post about how, hey, you could use Nethermind, you could use Base, you could use Aragon as a solo staker, or as someone who at the time was just running a full node, and if you weren't mining, you couldn't stake yet. But as a solo staker, at that point, you were taking minimal risk running these things, because it was really just you and your validators, and most solo stakers probably don't run a lot of validators, right? So when you think about it from that kind of perspective, there was minimal risk there for you. But for a large staking operation, there is a lot more risk involved. So they want to wait until these things are relatively stable, until they've been out for a while, until they become much better clients. And over the last 12 months, they have definitely have become much better clients, and definitely ready for Coinbase to kind of use now, I think. And that's why they're basically putting this tweet thread out and these kind of updates out and putting that signal out there. But at the end of the day, I don't think this would have happened nearly as fast as it did if it wasn't for the social layer push. And I actually quote tweeted Coinbase's tweet where I said, "This is Ethereum's social layer at work. Don't let anyone tell you that the social layer isn't important." The social layer is the most important thing in Ethereum, as I've banged on about for years now. But I do want to kind of caveat that with saying that there is limits to the social layer. I have said in the past that I think that the social layer is limited in what it can do with regards to staking distribution. Obviously, we've put a lot of pressure on Lido, and there's been a lot of talk about Lido being a large part of the network for a very long time now, and it hasn't really moved the needle there. And the only thing that's really moved the needle in terms of stopping Lido from growing more on a relative basis, they've still grown on a real basis, but on a relative basis, their growth has basically stalled, was because there was more competition from other protocols. There was vampire attacks going on, right? There was incentives going on, all that sorts of stuff there, and that's why we've seen a big kind of a shift over to these other protocols here. And the social layer, it reinforces that by basically acting as a marketing vehicle and basically saying, hey, you should stake with other providers. Here are the other providers. Here's how you do it. Here's how you solo stake if you want to. Here's how you set up a rocket pool node. All these sorts of stuff, right? But when it comes to actually affecting large scale kind of direct change, it's very hard for the social layer to do that with staking distribution. But it is very easy for the social layer to do that with client diversity. We have precedent for this. We did it with consensus layer client diversity, where we basically pushed the providers to get off majority Prism. And it was easier back then because the clients, most of the consensus layer clients were basically built around the same time, which means they were up to spec at around the same time. And Coinbase Cloud actually even mentions it in their Twitter thread here, where they said that when they switched to Lighthouse, they actually needed the Lighthouse team to implement a feature called remote signing in order to allow for them to switch over. And then the Lighthouse team did that, and Coinbase Cloud was able to switch over there. So, as I said, we've had precedent of the social layer having real and lasting change here. And we're doing it again. Now, if Coinbase goes from 100% Geth to like 0% Geth and goes like fully to Nethermind or Base or whatever else, this, I believe, would bring Geth's supermajority down. Geth off a supermajority. It would bring Geth's market share down below 66%. I think just doing the rough math in my head, it's kind of, we're guesstimating here, but I think that should, along with some maybe Lido node operators getting off Geth, that should bring us down to below 66%, which is the supermajority threshold. Now, as long as we're below that, even by 0.1%, that is great. Now, obviously, we want to get that even lower. Like, ideally, I've gone through this before. Ideally, we don't want any one client being over 50%. But let's start small, right? Let's start with that first goal in mind, is getting Geth below the supermajority, because then we get rid of the critical risk. Then we get rid of the biggest issue right now, which is the fact that if there was, as I explained yesterday, a bug in Geth, right now, we would finalize on that bug chain, and it would be a shit show to enact the social layer and to do a social coordination fork. And when it comes to the social layer as well, I think that there are two aspects to it. There's the aspect to it where the social layer can affect out of protocol change, which is client diversity stuff, which is staking diversity stuff, which is kind of setting the mission and goals of the Ethereum network, censorship, stuff like that. But when it comes to direct in protocol stuff, such as social slashing, as I've discussed before, such as potentially rolling back the chain after like a bug on a supermajority client, that is quite literally the nuclear option. That is the last resort. We should never, ever enact that option unless we're out of all other options. And I've gone through this before about why that's the case. It destroys Ethereum's credible neutrality. It destroys Ethereum's value prop. It just is really bad for Ethereum. And we are building Ethereum as a network to basically make it so that that social layer, while that social option, while it exists, should never have to be used. Because at the end of the day, as I said, like if we use it, a lot of Ethereum's credible neutrality goes away, which is the main point here. So as I said, the social layer is extremely important. It does have its limitations, but don't let anyone tell you that it's not important, because it's very important. Without the social layer, without Ethereum social layer putting pressure on Coinbase and others to change over, it probably wouldn't have happened for a long time, if ever. Maybe it wouldn't have happened at all. We don't know. The fact that we put pressure on it and it's happening now is a testament to Ethereum's social layer here and a testament to the Ethereum community. So kudos to everyone who made noise about this. Big kudos to DC Investor for finally getting, Brian Armstrong's attention. I know there are other people at Coinbase, some of the protocol specialists out there. They definitely had attention on this, but at the end of the day, they're part of a centralized company. Brian's at the head of that company. He's the CEO. So if he's actually pushing for something, it's more likely to get done much faster than otherwise. So yeah, just wanted to say a big kudos to DC there, but also a huge shout out to Superfizz, who has been banging the client diversity drum for a long time, probably even longer than I have, honestly. Like I think even longer than I have, definitely been a lot more active and louder about it than I have on places like Twitter and on Reddit. And speaking of Reddit, Superfizz shared today basically a post that he put on Reddit all the way back in, I believe it was February 2022. So over 2 years ago now, he put a post on here just giving a brief history of client diversity on the Beacon chain. So this obviously just applies to the Beacon chain, just applies to consensus layer client diversity, but still obviously a lot of these things translate over to execution layer client diversity. So if you want to go read that, you can. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But yeah, Superfizz and the ETH community at large as well have been instrumental in getting the word out about client diversity, but also about staking diversity as well. They've been a really strong part of Ethereum social layer for a very long time. So huge kudos to them for all of that. But as I said, you can go check out that for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. I think I've ranted enough about client diversity over the last 2 episodes. Hopefully we have a break about that for a little bit here. But really, I think the main takeaway from this is not so much got to do with client diversity, but more got to do with Ethereum social layer, where we need to keep in mind that Ethereum social layer is the most important and most valuable thing that Ethereum has. And we need to keep on banging that drum, and we need to keep rejecting people who say that it doesn't matter. Anytime I see someone say it doesn't matter on Twitter, I kind of bite my tongue a lot, because I don't want to get into like Twitter fights. I hate getting into Twitter fights these days. It doesn't really end well for anyone. But really, we should just keep reinforcing the importance of Ethereum's social layer. But anyway, I think end rant there for now. Moving on to a tweet from Stephen Goldfeder today. So just another tweet. I covered another tweet from him yesterday. I've seen a bunch of comparisons on Twitter today around TPS between chains, or transactions per second between chains. And I want to say that TPS is an extremely flawed metric. I think I've said this before. It's a flawed metric for a number of reasons. So in Steven's tweet, he basically brings up that comparing L2 activity to Ethereum L1 using TPS is like counting the number of bills in your wallet, but ignoring that some are singles, some are 20s, and some are hundreds. A much better metric is gas per second, and Arbitrum 1 alone is already processing way more than L1. And this is because not all TPS is created equal, right? And I've explained why before. I'm not going to rehash it all here, but the TLDR is basically that, especially when it comes to L2s, the TPS that you see on there, because there's different kind of gas metering on there, it's very different to Ethereum L1, and it's very different to other networks out there. And then when you're looking at other L1s, like if it's a cheap ghost L1, it can fake a lot of its TPS. I mean, I replied to Steven's tweet and I said, we've known about this since at least 2018 during the early EOS days, and we've known that TPS is one of the most useless metrics in crypto. And I'll expand on that by giving a bit of background for those of you who weren't around back then. EOS back in 2018 was advertising that they were doing millions and millions and millions of transactions per day and X amount of transactions per second. And they were saying, we're killing Ethereum. We can do this really cheaply, blah, 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 whatever. One, it was because they were a ghost chain. Two, it's because they basically centralized the entire chain, right? There were 21 block producers that controlled the chain back then, and I don't know what it's like today. I mean, EOS isn't really relevant today, but and obviously the cost was borne by the token holders, as it usually is in these scenarios. Yeah, so they weren't really doing. And the thing is because it was so cheap, these transactions were basically just all spam, right? It wasn't real user activity. It was just spamming the chain, and this happens today on other L1s too. There's just really people spamming the chain with crap, and it's not real user activity. Now, I've also said before that I think measuring real user activity is extremely difficult. I know that Jesse Polak tweeted recently that Coinbase is looking into how to actually measure real user activity on the base network and then expanding that out to other L2s. But it's very, very difficult. And, it's kind of funny because sometimes people say that, well, you can kind of tell by the vibes of the chain, about the vibes of Arbitrum or the vibes of Optimism or the vibes of Ethereum. And I don't necessarily think that's a silly argument, to be honest. Like, people will say, oh, that's silly. What's vibes? I mean, it's very subjective. There's no real metrics to point at, but it's more about the energy of the ecosystem, the organic energy of the ecosystem. Obviously, in Ethereum and even in Bitcoin, you can feel the organic energy in that ecosystem. But then you go to others and you can feel a lot of it is just very mercenary, very kind of like non-organic or inorganic, very like airdrop farmer heavy kind of activity, right? And you kind of get a sense for that just based on your own intuition. So yes, it's not based on any hard metrics. It really is just based on vibes, but that's actually a pretty good signal, at least I believe it is. And it's actually probably better than a lot of the hard metrics that we use, because vibes is very hard to fake. You can't really fake organic activity, because by very definition of the word organic in that, in that sentence there, is that it's natural. It happens naturally. It's not forced. People aren't forced to do this. They're not here for the quote unquote wrong reasons, right? They're missionaries, not mercenaries, sort of thing. So when it comes to actually measuring activity, maybe the best metric we have, which isn't really a hard metric, is vibes. And I know it sounds a bit silly, but I think it's actually worked quite well. I mean, at least for me it has, because Ethereum to me has always had the best vibes. I've stuck around in Ethereum because of the vibes, and vibes can mean just community here, and developer community, just general community, the enthusiast community. It's always been really strong, and that's translated to the L2s. I feel that from a lot of the L2s. Some of them I don't feel that from, but a fair few of them I do feel that from. I feel that organic activity happening there, that missionary kind of style happening there, and people being excited about things for the right reasons, or at least what I consider to be the right reasons. There's no right or wrong reasons here. It's a very subjective thing, but it is a subjective metric. This is not something that has a hard fact that you can point to. In saying all of that, there are other metrics out there that I believe are definitely better than TPS. You guys know that one of my favorite metrics is fee revenue, and I'm not talking about people spending like lots of money on fees. I'm talking about total fee revenue for that chain, because it means that there's actually real kind of demand there for that. And I'm not going to say that all of that demand is quote unquote organic, right? A lot of it could be things like people airdrop farming, stuff like that. But the fact that they have to pay for that, the fact that there's actually a cost incurred there, and it's adding up to a lot of fee revenue for that chain, to me is a pretty good measure of activity that is very hard to fake, because there's a cost there to do that, right? There's a large cost, especially on ETH L1, for example, where the cost is quite large per transaction. And then obviously as you go to L2s, it becomes a bit easier to fake because the fees are cheaper, but still there is that kind of cost there. Whereas if there's basically no cost, if it's basically free, then it's very easy to spam, because it's very cheap to spam, and you have all these kind of metrics get inflated. And we've seen this play out not just on Ethereum L1 and L2s, but on other chains as well. Like, metrics get inflated all the time. That's why you guys know that I prefer looking at long-term metrics over short-term metrics, and long-term here is years. It's not like a month versus a week. It's literally years worth of metrics. And honestly, the best long-term metric, if I'm going back to it, is vibes, because an organic community stays around and sticks around for a long time. The missionaries stick around for a long time. The mercenaries, the inorganic community, the people who bring the bad vibes, right? And when I say vibes, I should say good vibes, but when people bring the bad vibes, they're usually locust-like. They don't stick around for very long. They're gone as quickly as they came, and they're usually only around when things are going good, like when the market's going up and people are making money, right? All that sorts of stuff there. So when you think about it from that perspective, I think the vibes is actually a totally legitimate thing to look at when looking at different chains. But at the same time, there are also a bunch of hard metrics you can look at, but you really do need to contextualize them. You need to look at them over the long term, and you need to realize that no one of these metrics is perfect. They're basically basically like the least worst things. We're basically trying to get to the least worst ones that we can get to there. Anyway, enough on that topic. Moving on to an update from ZKP2P today. So you guys know that ZKP2P is a trustless P2P fiat on-ramp powered by ZK proofs using Venmo in the background. So today they announced that their UPI integration in ZKP2 is live on the ZKP2P alpha. Users can now swap peer-to-peer from Indian rupees to USDC on base without trusting any intermediaries. This is our first launch internationally, and where alternative options for swapping fiat to crypto are sorely needed. So I think that this is obviously not using Venmo, it's using HDFC, which is, I guess, what UPI kind of supports. So they support HDFC bank accounts. Users will have the ability to swap 100 USDC every 12 hours, and you can on-ramp your Indian rupees here, and there's a guide here in the tweet thread. I'll link that for you guys to check out. So if any of you are based in India here and you want to use this, you can. As I said, I'll link it in the YouTube description. But great to see this is expanding. I think ZKP2P is one of the most exciting things that I've come across over the last few months within the crypto ecosystem, because it's distinctly different from a lot of other things out there. It is not a fork of anything. It is not something that we've seen before. It is pretty much totally new. I don't think I've seen any other team do this before, any other project tackle this before. And I know that there are limits to it. Obviously, there are limits of how much you can onboard per day, and obviously there are limits in that you have to KYC for something like Venmo and HDFC, or not like, I guess, traditional KYC, but like there are kind of I guess fingerprints there, as I should say, where people can kind of identify you. But it's I think like that's the same thing as any fiat on ramp, and I think that doing a fiat on ramp without any kind of KYC is basically impossible from what I know, unless you do it like peer-to-peer in person via cash, which is the worst way to do it because the security is so low. Like, I'd much rather just go through the KYC road than ever do a in-person peer-to-peer swap, from cash to like ETH or something like that. There's just too much that could go wrong in that situation, right? Like, so I'd much rather just put up with the KYC, but at the end of the day, like, obviously I'd much rather there not be KYC, but that's just not how that traditional finance system works. There is always going to be KYC there, and you do have to go through that in order to onboard. But at the end of the day, like, that's, I guess, like, that's the only blocker, because once you're on board and once you're onboarded onto a crypto network, there's no need to KYC to use Base, to use, Ethereum L1 and L2s out there. They're fully permissionless. You can bridge between them, and you can basically stay there for as long as you want. I know that USDC obviously is a centralized stablecoin. It is fully permissioned stablecoin, where at any moment the circle could freeze your funds for whatever reason. Maybe there's a government order to freeze your funds. But if you want it to be fully self-sovereign, you can just onboard out via USDC, then trade that USDC to ETH on a decentralized exchange like Uniswap, for example, or CowSwap, and then you're able to just go and use that ETH to do whatever you want with it. Yes, obviously ETH is volatile, more volatile than a lot of things out there. But if you're trying to basically protect your capital and protect your wealth, you go into ETH. You don't keep it in USDC. At least that's my opinion. Like, I would never keep large amounts of money in USDC or any kind of like centralized stablecoin. I mean, I'm a bit different, because for me, keeping money in USD, I expose myself to currency risk, because I obviously have taxes and bills paid in AUD in Australia. And I also incur taxable events when I go between things. I go between USD and AUD, which is an annoying kind of headache. So I don't usually sit there. And I also think that if I'm going to sit in cash, I'm just going to sit in AUD in my bank account, because like I trust the local banks here than I do kind of hit my money in USDC on chain, where it can be frozen for whatever reason by Circle, and as I said, I'm exposing myself to currency risk, so it's a bit different there. But if we're talking about basically just the easiest way to onboard trustlessly, I think ZKP2P is fast becoming one of those. So yeah, you can go check this out. Link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. I just realized I'm almost at time here, so just wanted to quickly kind of cover this update from Axiom. So they announced today that Axiom V2 is now live on the Ethereum mainnet. Axiom V2 allows smart contracts to trustlessly compute over the entire history of Ethereum, including transactions and receipts. And you can learn more below. This is one for the developers out there. You can go check this out. I'll link in the YouTube description below, but I'm not going to spend too much time here. I just wanted to highlight it for the developers out there. This is now available to you. Axiom is a really, really cool project using a bunch of cool technology to basically enable developers to do trustless computation, do things like off-chain computation, co-processing, all that sorts of stuff. So you can go check this out. As I said, I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, last up here, just a bit of, I guess, more markets talk from yesterday. I know the markets have been relatively weak today, and everyone's pointing to things like the GBTC sell-off. I think that it got confirmed yesterday. The FTX estate ended up selling $1 billion worth of GBTC because obviously they're in bankruptcy proceedings and they want to return those funds to users. But I put out a tweet where I said, always remember that the SEC greenlit GBTC, one of the worst crypto products to ever exist, but held off on approving BTC spot ETFs for a decade. The SEC does not exist to protect you. So two things on this one I wanted to expand on. One, the reason why I say GBTC is one of the worst products to ever exist pre-conversion to an ETF was that it was a closed-ended fund. And that meant that it traded at a premium or it traded at a discount. And that meant that it wrecked a lot of people. Now, if you actually, and I've mentioned this before on the refuel, if you actually look back, and this is the second thing, if you actually look back and see what ended up being the Widowmaker trade and what ended up being the kind of thing that blew up a lot of people in crypto, it was the GBTC trade. When people went into GBTC to do some carry trade, and then the GBTC stuff started trading at a premium and then at a discount, and then all the leverage blew up, and everything else blew up, like Terra and FTX and all that. And you can actually trace a lot of that back to GBTC. So in reality, the SEC protected no one with this product. They greenlit a vastly inferior product to an ETF. They let it exist for a very long time. They let it get really, really big. And now we're still suffering the overhang of this product because a lot of people don't want to be in GBTC anymore, even as an ETF, because the fees are really high. And also people were just playing the discount trade where they maybe bought GBTC at like a 40%, 30% discount. And then once the discount went to zero, because obviously it got converted to an ETF, so now it's not just a closed-ended fund, it's a normal ETF where you can redeem. People are doing that. And we saw FTX do that indiscriminately, $1 billion. There's been more than that outflowing. We don't know exactly where it's outflowing to. We don't know if it's being, if GBTC is being, the BTC in that is being sold, and then people are going and buying BTC in another ETF. I'm sure there's a bunch of that happening, but it is an overhang on the market. It is something people are speculating on. And I think it is a main reason why we've seen weakness lately in the markets. But again, I go back to the SEC greenlit this and let it exist for a while denying spot BTC ETFs on the basis of they thought that the spot BTC ETFs were too risky, but GBTC wasn't, when in reality it was, and it is one of the worst products in crypto to ever exist pre-ETF. And there are still other products out there like GBTC, like ETH, for example, and others that Grayscale still has that they hope to convert to ETFs, when in reality it's probably only going to be ETH converting to an ETH ETF eventually. And you're probably going to see those outflows or similar outflows of ETH because of that. So really, the SEC protected no one. They were actually the ones that caused the most harm here. Yes, obviously, the people who went into GBTC recklessly and blew themselves up are 100% to blame. But I think the SEC is a bit to blame here as well, because of the fact, well, a lot to blame here as well, and very hypocritical because they let this product exist, which, as I said, was one of the worst products to exist in crypto, and we're still suffering the overhang from that. But I think on that note, that's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.